The war room of the Dominion flagship smelled wrong to Ambassador Velther. It smelled like fear, though he would never admit it. The holographic display showed another red sector, another world consumed by the Void Collective. 17 systems lost in 3 months. The military advisors stood silent, their faces expressing what their words could not. They were losing. Velther had spent 2 years searching for a solution. The Dominion had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years through careful strategy and overwhelming force. But the Void Collective did not care about strategy. They adapted faster than the Dominion could plan. Every tactic, every formation, every doctrine became useless within weeks. The war was not going well. Then they found Earth. The planet appeared on long-range scans as an insignificant blue marble in an unremarkable system. Initial surveys revealed something interesting. The humans had fought over 5,000 major wars in their recorded history. They had developed 7 different methods to exterminate their own species. They had survived all of them. Their military history read like a catalog of creative violence. The Dominion Council approved the recruitment mission with reluctance. They needed advisors who understood unconventional warfare. Velther assembled a delegation and traveled to Earth, expecting to meet with generals and strategists. He expected discipline. He expected military professionalism. He got Captain Deho. Instead, the human walked into the meeting room with a casual stride that made Velther's scales itch. Deho wore a simple uniform with few decorations. His face was young, but his eyes were not. Those eyes had seen things. Behind him came Lieutenant Minji, a woman with sharp features and a smile that never reached her eyes. Sergeant Taiwan followed last. A broad-shouldered man who looked at everything like he was calculating blast radius. Velther began his presentation. He showed footage of Void Collective attacks. Ships torn apart. Colonies reduced to ash. Millions dead. He explained the strategic situation, the defensive lines, the projected casualty rates. He made his case for why Earth should send military advisors to help the Dominion. Deho watched the footage without expression. When a particularly brutal scene played, showing civilians fleeing a burning city, Minji leaned forward with interest. Taiwan actually smiled. "Do they bleed?" Taiwan asked. Velther blinked his secondary eyelids in confusion. "I'm sorry?" "The enemy. Do they bleed? Do they feel pain?" Taiwan's voice was casual, like he was asking about the weather. "Yes, they are biological entities. They feel pain." Taiwan nodded, satisfied. "Good, that's important." Velther felt something cold move down his spine. He looked at Deho. "Captain, the Dominion is prepared to offer significant compensation for military advisory services. We need strategic consultation, tactical analysis, and training programs for our forces." Deho tilted his head. "You want us to teach your soldiers how to fight?" "Yes, we need expertise in unconventional warfare." "Ambassador, how many inhabited worlds does the Dominion control?" "Approximately 3,700. "And you're losing to these void things?" Velther's crest darkened with embarrassment. "They adapt very quickly. Our traditional methods have proven insufficient." Minji laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "Traditional methods. That's your problem? You're fighting a war like it has rules?" "War does have rules," Velther said stiffly. "The Dominion adheres to strict codes of military conduct. We do not target civilians. We do not use weapons of mass destruction on inhabited worlds. We do not employ biological or chemical warfare. We are civilized." The 3 humans looked at each other. Something passed between them, some shared understanding that excluded everyone else in the room. Deho leaned back in his chair. "Ambassador, I need you to understand something about Earth. We've been fighting each other for our entire history. We've used every weapon you just mentioned. We've targeted civilians. We've burned cities. We've poisoned wells and salted fields. We've done things that would make your Void Collective look merciful." "That's barbaric," Velther whispered. "Yes," Deho agreed. "It is, but we're still here. We survived. Do you know why?" Velther did not answer. Because we learned that survival doesn't care about civilization. It doesn't care about rules or honor or doing the right thing. Survival cares about one thing: who's still standing when the dust settles. Minji pulled up her own datapad. We reviewed your tactical reports. Your fleet formations are textbook perfect. Your logistics are efficient. Your casualty rates are acceptable by military standards. You're fighting a proper war. What's wrong with that? Velthor asked. Everything, Taiwan said. You're giving the enemy time to adapt. You're being predictable. You're being civilized. That's why you're losing. Deho stood up and walked to the holographic display. He zoomed in on a contested system. If we do this, we do it our way. No supervision, no committee oversight, no rules of engagement that tie our hands. You give us command authority and you let us work. The Council would never approve unrestricted authority for aliens, Velthor protested. Then you'll lose? Deho said simply. The Void Collective will keep adapting, keep advancing, keep killing. And in a few years, maybe less, they'll reach your core worlds. Then you'll use those weapons you mentioned. The biological weapons. The chemical weapons. The planet killers. You'll use them because you'll be desperate. But by then it might be too late. The room fell silent. Velthor's hands trembled slightly. Everything Deho said was true. The projections showed it. Without a major tactical shift, the Dominion would face that exact choice within 5 years. What are you proposing? Velthor asked quietly. Deho smiled. It was not a reassuring smile. We're proposing that you let us be the monsters now, while you can still control it. Let us do the things you won't do. The things you can't do? We'll stop the Void Collective. But you're not going to like how we do it. Velthor looked at the 3 humans. He thought about the burning worlds on his display. He thought about the millions already dead. He thought about the choice ahead. He made a decision that would change the galaxy forever. I'll take your proposal to the Council, he said. Minji grinned. Tell them to approve it quickly. The longer you wait, the more people die. And unlike you, we're used to that. As the humans left, Velthor stared at the holographic display. He had come to Earth looking for generals. Military professionals who would follow Dominion doctrine and provide conventional expertise. Instead, he was bringing back something else entirely. Something that scared him more than the Void Collective. He was bringing back humans who understood that sometimes civilization survived only by forgetting what it meant to be civilized. The war was about to change. Admiral Kroshvin had commanded the 7th Fleet for 30 years. He had fought in 12 campaigns and never lost a battle. He ran his fleet with precision and discipline. When the humans arrived at his flagship, he expected to brief them on standard Dominion tactical doctrine. That expectation lasted approximately 10 minutes. Daho sat in the strategy room reviewing battle reports. Minji examined intelligence data on Void Collective movements. Taiwan studied the fleet's defensive positions around the Corvan system. After 10 minutes of silence, Deho looked up at the Admiral. You're doing everything wrong, he said. Kroshvin's crest flared with anger. Excuse me? Your defensive line. It's too predictable. The Void Collective can see exactly where you'll be, exactly how you'll respond. You're making it easy for them. That defensive line is held for 6 months, Kroshvin said coldly. It follows standard military procedure. Every ship positioned for maximum coverage and mutual support. Minji snorted. That's the problem. You're fighting like they're a rational enemy? Like they care about their casualties or their logistics? They don't. They just keep coming until they find a weakness. Then they exploit it, so what do you suggest? Kroshvin asked, barely controlling his temper. Deho pulled up a tactical map. We make them think they've found a weakness. We create gaps in your line. We leave supply depots poorly defended. We make it look like you're stretched too thin. Then when they commit forces to exploit those weaknesses, we kill them. That's a trap. Yes, it's dishonorable. Deho stared at him. Admiral, do you want to win or do you want to be honorable? Before Kroshvin could respond, Taiwan stood up. I need to inspect your supply depots. All of them. And I need access to your antimatter storage. Why? Kroshvin asked suspiciously. Because I'm going to rig them to explode. The room went silent. Every Dominion officer stared at Taiwan like he had suggested eating their young. You want to destroy our own supplies? Kroshvin's voice was dangerously quiet. Not destroy, weaponize, the Void Collective will try to capture them? They always do. So we let them, then we detonate the charges remotely. No more Void Collective. Problem solved. That violates the Dominion Warfare Accords. Article 7 specifically prohibits booby-trapping civilian infrastructure. Minji looked up from her datapad. Are we in civilian territory? No, but the principle, then it doesn't apply. These are military assets in a war zone. We're just making sure the enemy can't use them. She smiled. It's really very simple. Over the next 3 weeks, the humans implemented their plan. They convinced Kroshven to thin his defensive line. They repositioned ships in patterns that looked weak to enemy analysis. They left supply depots lightly guarded. Taiwan personally installed remote detonation systems in 17 locations. The Dominion officers watched with growing horror. Some filed formal protests. Others requested transfers. A few threatened mutiny. Kroshven held them together through sheer force of will, though he shared their concerns. The humans were either brilliant or insane. Possibly both, the Void Collective noticed the changes. Their scout ships probed the defensive line more aggressively. They found the gaps. They analyzed the supply depot positions. Their battle computers calculated probability of success and reported favorable outcomes. They attacked. The assault came at dawn by local time. Void Collective ships poured through the gaps in the defensive line. Their fighters swept toward the supply depots. Their capital ships moved to secure strategic positions. Everything went exactly as their battle computers predicted. Daeho watched from the flagship bridge, his expression calm. Beside him, Minji counted enemy ships on her display. Taiwan held a small control device, his thumb resting on a red button. They're taking the bait, Minji said. 70% of their fleet committed to the supply depot assault. Life signs at the depots? Daeho asked. All personnel evacuated. Buildings are empty. Daeho nodded. He looked at Kroshven. Your fleet is in position? The admiral's voice was tight. Yes, hidden in the asteroid field as you requested. Then let's do it. Taiwan? Taiwan pressed the button. 17 supply depots exploded simultaneously. The antimatter charges created miniature suns that vaporized everything within 5 kilometers. Void Collective ships caught in the blast simply ceased to exist. Others were caught by the expanding shockwaves and torn apart. The enemy formation disintegrated into chaos. Kroshven stared at the tactical display. Half the enemy fleet gone in seconds. The survivors scattered, their coordination destroyed. Now, Admiral, Daeho said quietly. While they're confused, Kroshven gave the order. The 7th Fleet emerged from hiding and opened fire. The Void Collective ships tried to regroup, but the humans had planned for that too. Minji had been broadcasting false retreat signals that confused enemy communications. The Void ships turned to flee, but ran straight into another Dominion task force. It was not a battle. It was a massacre. When the shooting stopped, 90% of the Void Collective attack force was destroyed. The survivors fled in disorder. The Corvan system was secure. The bridge crew stood in stunned silence. In 30 years of warfare, they had never seen anything like it. The humans had turned the enemy's aggression against them. They had used deception, trap, and overwhelming violence to achieve total victory. Kroshven felt sick. You destroyed 17 supply depots. Months of supplies? The cost will be less than the cost of losing this system, Daeho interrupted. Supplies can be replaced. Ships can be rebuilt. Soldiers can be retrained. But if you lose strategic positions, you lose the war. This isn't how the Dominion fights, Kroshven said. No, Minji agreed. This is how humans fight. This is how you survive when you're outnumbered and outgunned. You cheat. You lie. You make the enemy think they're winning right up until you kill them. Over the next month, the humans implemented similar strategies across 3 systems. They broadcast false surrender signals to lure void fleets into kill zones. They rigged abandoned colonies with traps. They launched raids that had no strategic value, except to keep the enemy off balance and afraid. The Void Collective's advance stopped. For the first time in 2 years, they were forced to consolidate rather than expand. Their battle computers struggled to predict human tactics because human tactics had no pattern. Every engagement was different. Every strategy was unexpected. The Dominion Council received reports with mixed reactions. Some called for medals and promotions. Others demanded the humans be arrested for war crimes. The debate raged for weeks. Velther visited Deho during this time. They stood in an observation deck, watching supply ships move between stations. The Council wants to court-martial you, Velther said. They say you violated every principle of civilized warfare. Have we won? Deho asked, Yes, the Void Collective is in retreat. Then I don't care what they think. Deho turned to face the ambassador. You brought us here to stop an enemy you couldn't beat. We're doing that. But we're doing it our way. Your way involves destroying worlds and rigging supplies to explode. Yes, and it works. Velther was quiet for a long moment. I don't know if we did the right thing bringing humans into this war. Deho smiled without humor. You didn't have a choice. You were losing. Now you're winning. The question isn't whether we're doing the right thing. The question is whether you can live with the things we have to do to keep you alive. The ambassador had no answer to that. He watched the supply ships and wondered if the price of victory might be too high after all. The Dominion Council meeting hall had stood for 3,000 years. Its walls were made of crystal that captured and reflected light in patterns meant to inspire calm deliberation. Today, the light patterns looked like blood. Councillor Thress stood at the podium, her voice shaking with rage. They destroyed 3 inhabited worlds. Not colonies. Not outposts. Worlds with billions of civilians. The humans detonated antimatter charges in the planetary cores and killed everyone. Deho sat in the witness chair, his posture relaxed. Behind him stood Minji and Taiwan. Around the chamber, hundreds of council members watched with expressions ranging from horror to grudging respect. The worlds were already evacuated, Deho said calmly. We gave the civilian population 3 weeks' notice. Every transport in the sector was used to move them to safety. 0 civilian casualties, but the planets themselves were bait. The Void Collective moved 3 full fleets to occupy those systems. They thought they'd won a major victory. Then we triggered the charges. 3 fleets gone. 20,000 enemy ships destroyed in one operation. Deho leaned forward. That's 20,000 ships that won't be attacking your core worlds. Velther watched from his seat in the diplomatic section. The past 6 months had aged him. His scales had lost their luster. His eyes were tired. He had advocated for giving the humans expanded authority. Now he wondered if that had been a mistake. Thress continued her prosecution. You violated 17 articles of the Warfare Accords. You've used biological agents, chemical weapons, and psychological warfare techniques that are explicitly banned. We've won 17 major engagements, Deho replied. We've pushed the Void Collective back 7 sectors. We've cut their supply lines and destroyed their command infrastructure. The war you were losing is now a war you're winning. All because we don't follow your rules. Rules exist for a reason. Yes, Minji interjected, standing up. They exist so civilized people can feel good about war, so they can tell themselves they're better than their enemies. But you know what? The Void Collective doesn't care about your rules. They'll kill you anyway. At least our way, you're still alive. The chamber erupted in argument. Some council members shouted support. Others demanded immediate arrest of all human personnel. The speaker struggled to restore order. Admiral Kroshven watched from the military gallery. He no longer protested human tactics. His fleet had the best combat record in the Dominion military. Ships requested transfers to serve under human advisors. Soldiers who had been demoralized and frightened now fought with confidence. The humans were crude and brutal, but they delivered results. The council debate continued for 3 days. In the end, they reached a compromise. The humans would be promoted and given expanded authority, but with oversight from a special committee. It was a political solution that satisfied no one. Deho accepted the decision without comment. He had more important concerns. More humans had arrived from Earth. Major Ji-won specialized in biological warfare. She was a small woman with gentle features and a mind that understood viruses the way artists understood color. Dr. Kyung-soo was a psychologist who had spent 10 years studying fear as a military weapon. Commander Sora commanded a frigate squadron and believed that ramming was an underutilized tactic. They met in a secure briefing room. Deho laid out the strategic situation. The Void Collective was adapting to human tactics. They had begun using decentralized command structures. They avoided obvious traps. They no longer concentrated their fleets in predictable patterns. They're learning, Minji said. Which means we need to escalate. Ji-won pulled up biological data on the Void Collective. Their collective consciousness requires constant communication between units. If we disrupt that communication at the neurological level, we can fragment their coordination. You mean poison them? Kroshvin said flatly. He was attending the meeting as fleet liaison. I mean, introduce a targeted pathogen that affects their neural tissues. It won't kill them. It'll just make them confused, scared, unable to coordinate. Ji-won smiled. Fear is more effective than death. Dead soldiers can't retreat and spread panic. Kyung-soo nodded in agreement. We've been destroying their ships and installations. That's material loss. They can absorb that. What we need to do is break their will to fight. Make them afraid to enter systems we control. Make them fear human involvement in any operation. How? Velthor asked. He attended all human strategy sessions now, some horrible fascination compelling him to witness what he had unleashed. We make examples, Kyung-soo said. We capture void installations and reprogram them. Make them broadcast their own destruction. Make them send messages back to the collective showing what happens when they face humans. We don't just defeat them. We traumatize them. Sora leaned back in her chair. And when they cluster their fleets for psychological safety, I take my squadron and ram them. Nothing terrifies an enemy like a ship that deliberately crashes into them. It's unexpected. It's personal. It makes them afraid. Taiwan grinned. I like her. The strategy was implemented over the next 3 months. Ji-won's pathogen was deployed in 6 systems. Void collective forces became erratic and disorganized. They fired on each other. They fled from empty space. Their rigid coordination dissolved into chaos. Kyung-soo's psychological operations were even more effective. Captured installations were forced to broadcast endless loops of their own destruction. Void ships that survived battles found their communication channels flooded with images of human soldiers and burning stations. The message was clear: resist and suffer. Sora's ramming tactics created a new kind of terror. Her frigates would accelerate to ramming speed and crash directly into enemy capital ships. The damage was mutual, but the psychological impact was devastating. The Void Collective had never encountered an enemy willing to die just to kill them. The strategy worked. The Void Collective began avoiding systems where humans were present. Their advance stopped completely. Some units even retreated from conquered territory, but success came with cost. Refugee populations fled war zones by the millions. Habitable systems were rendered toxic by biological agents. The psychological operations created trauma that would last generations, Velthor confronted Deho in his quarters late one night. You're creating a humanitarian disaster. Millions of beings are displaced. Entire populations are traumatized. The weapons you're using will have consequences for decades. Deho was reviewing casualty reports. He looked up, his eyes tired. Every war has humanitarian consequences. The only question is whether those consequences include the complete destruction of your civilization. We're preventing that by becoming monsters, by doing what needs to be done. Deho stood up. You think I enjoy this? You think any of us do? We're soldiers, Ambassador. We follow orders. We complete missions. We do what civilians can't or won't do. That's our job. At what cost to yourselves? Deho was quiet for a long moment. That's not your concern. But it was someone's concern. Velther had noticed changes in the human personnel. Taiwan no longer smiled. He moved through battles like an automaton, calculating optimal destruction with mechanical efficiency. Minji's reports had become colder, more clinical. She recommended increasingly extreme measures without hesitation. Even Deho was different. His expressions were harder. His decisions came faster. He was becoming what war required him to be. The Dominion Council met again to discuss limiting human authority. The debate was fierce. Some argued the humans had gone too far. Others countered that too far was the only place far enough to win. During the debate, news arrived of a Void Collective counterattack. A massive enemy fleet had broken through Dominion lines and was heading directly for Earth. The chamber fell silent. Everyone looked at Deho. His face showed no expression. They're targeting our homeworld. We can redirect forces, Kroshvin said. Recall the 7th Fleet. No. Deho's voice was hard. You'll keep pressure on their main forces. Earth can defend itself. Are you certain? Deho smiled without humor. Ambassador Velther asked me once what makes humans different from the monsters we fight. The answer is simple. We chose this. We trained for it. We prepared for it. The Void Collective is about to learn what happens when you attack a planet full of soldiers. The counterattack on Earth was repelled within 18 hours. Human home defense forces used tactics that made even Deho's operations look restrained. The Void Collective fleet was annihilated. Not a single ship escaped to report what they had encountered, but the attempt had consequences. The Void Collective had shown they could think strategically. They had learned to target what humans valued most. They were adapting in ways that transcended mere tactical evolution. The war was escalating in ways no one had anticipated. And somewhere in the chaos, the line between defender and destroyer was becoming impossible to find. Taiwan stood in the ruins of what had been a Void Collective command station. Bodies lay scattered among the wreckage. Dominion soldiers moved through the debris, securing the area. He watched them work with detached interest, calculating how many charges it would take to demolish the remaining structure. A young Dominion soldier approached him, scales pale with shock. Sergeant, we found survivors in the lower levels. What should we do with them? Taiwan considered the question like a math problem. Prisoners required resources, transport, guard personnel, processing time. The tactical value was minimal. How many? About 40. Are they combatants? Most appear to be technical staff, communications operators. Some may be civilians. Taiwan nodded slowly. The logical answer was simple. Eliminate them. Save resources. Move to the next objective. His hand moved toward his weapon before he stopped himself. He looked at his hand like it belonged to someone else. Secure them, he said finally. Follow standard prisoner protocols. The soldier saluted and left. Taiwan stood alone in the ruins, wondering when killing prisoners had become his first instinct. Instead of his last resort, the war was taking its toll on all of them. Minji barely slept anymore. She spent her nights analyzing enemy communications and designing new psychological weapons. Her reports recommended tactics that made even Deho hesitate. Guan's biological agents had become more aggressive, more persistent. She spoke about populations and vectors the way normal people spoke about weather, and Deho himself had changed. He made decisions that cost thousands of lives without visible emotion. He approved operations that violated laws he once defended. His orders came faster, sharper, with no room for debate or doubt. They were winning. That was what mattered. The Void Collective was in full retreat across 5 sectors. Their command structure was fragmenting. Their forces were demoralized and disorganized. Victory was within reach, but the cost was becoming clear. Refugee camps stretched across dozens of systems. 15 million beings had been displaced by the fighting. Humanitarian aid was struggling to keep pace. Disease was spreading in overcrowded conditions. Children were dying from preventable causes. While military resources went toward offensive operations, the Dominion Council called an emergency session. Councillor Thress presented evidence of humanitarian violations, images of refugee camps, medical reports of biological agent exposure, testimony from survivors of psychological warfare campaigns. The cure has become worse than the disease, she declared. We are destroying the very civilization we claim to protect. Deho sat in the witness chair again. This time he looked tired. Lines had formed around his eyes. His uniform was clean but worn. We're fighting a war, he said quietly. Wars have costs, refugees, casualties, destruction. None of this is new. What's new is that you're winning. At what cost? Thress demanded. How many innocents must suffer for this victory? Fewer than would suffer under Void Collective occupation. Deho's voice was flat. I've seen their occupied territories. They don't take prisoners. They don't allow refugees. They consume everything. Every being. Every resource. Every world. You want to talk about humanitarian consequences? That's the alternative. The council chamber was silent. Everyone knew he was right. The choice had never been between violence and peace. It had been between controlled violence now or apocalyptic violence later, but knowledge did not make the choice easier. Admiral Kroshvin stood in the military gallery. The council must make a decision. Either we continue the current strategy and accept the humanitarian costs, or we moderate our approach and accept a longer war with higher military casualties. We cannot have both. The debate raged for hours. Moderates argued for restraint and humanitarian aid. Hawks demanded total prosecution of the war. The council was fracturing along philosophical lines that have remained dormant for millennia. While the council debated, Jiwan approached Deho with a proposal. She called it the final lesson protocol. Her expression was calm, clinical, the expression of a scientist presenting data, not a soldier proposing genocide. The Void Collective's command nodes are concentrated in 7 core systems, she explained. If we hit all 7 simultaneously with maximum force, we can fragment their entire organizational structure. They'll collapse into independent units without coordination or purpose. What kind of force? Deho asked, though he already knew the answer. Planetary bombardment. Biological agents. Antimatter weapons. Everything we have. We make those 7 systems uninhabitable. We make them an example that ends the war. Minji studied the tactical data. It would work. Psychologically, the impact would be devastating. Any remaining void forces would sue for peace rather than face similar destruction. How many casualties? Deho asked. Jiwan's voice was steady. Civilian casualties in the target systems would be total. Approximately 4 billion beings. But we'd save hundreds of billions in the long term by ending the war immediately. The room fell silent. Even Taiwan looked uncomfortable. 4 billion lives. Not soldiers. Not combatants. Civilians who happen to live in strategic locations. We'd need Dominion fleet support, Deho said slowly. This isn't something we can do alone. Admiral Kroshvin would support it, Minji said. His fleet has followed our lead on everything else. This is just the logical conclusion. Deho stared at the tactical display. 7 red markers indicating target systems. Each one a world full of living beings. Each one a potential tomb for billions. His hand moved toward the approval authorization, then stopped. No, he said quietly. Everyone stared at him. In 8 months of warfare, Deho had never refused an operational proposal based on tactical merit. Captain? Jiwan asked, confusion clear in her voice. I said no. We're not doing this. But the tactical analysis, I don't care about the tactical analysis. Deho stood up, his voice harder than they had ever heard it. We came here to help the Dominion win a war. Not to commit genocide? There's a difference, is there? Minji asked softly. We've already done terrible things. What's one more? Deho looked at her. Really looked at her. The woman who had laughed at footage of civilian casualties. The intelligence officer who designed weapons of pure terror. His friend and subordinate who had slowly become something else. The difference, he said carefully, is that we can still choose not to. That's what makes us soldiers instead of murderers. We follow orders, but we don't follow every order. We do what needs to be done, but we don't do everything that could be done. Before the conversation could continue, alarms blared throughout the station. A priority alert from Dominion Military Command. Moderate council members, led by Thress, were moving to remove all human personnel from command positions. Security forces were being dispatched to detain Deho and his staff. Taiwan moved to the weapons locker. We're not going to let them arrest us. Stand down, Deho ordered. Captain, they'll court-martial us. Execute us, probably. I gave you an order, Sergeant. The standoff lasted 3 hours. Human personnel loyal to Deho assembled in the command center. Dominion security forces surrounded the facility. Kroshvan's fleet moved into position, unclear which side they would support. Velther arrived to mediate. He looked old now, bent under the weight of decisions and consequences. He entered the command center alone, unarmed. Captain Deho, he said formally, the Council has voted to remove you from command pending investigation of humanitarian violations. I understand. You're not going to resist? No, Deho gestured for his personnel to stand down. We came here to help. Not to start a civil war. You could win one, Velther said quietly. Half the fleet is loyal to you. They've seen what you can do. They trust you more than they trust the Council. That's exactly why we're not fighting. Because we could win. Because soldiers should never be the ones making political decisions. Deho removed his sidearm and placed it on the table. We'll cooperate with the investigation. As Dominion security entered to take them into custody, something changed in Velther's expression. Understanding, perhaps. Or respect. I misjudged you, the ambassador said. I thought you were monsters who had forgotten how to be anything else. I was wrong? You're monsters who remember exactly what you've become. And you hate it as much as we do. Deho smiled sadly. We always hated it, Ambassador. That was never the question. The question was whether we could do it anyway when you needed us to. As they were led away, news arrived from the front lines. Void collective forces were in full retreat. They were abandoning occupied systems. Their leadership was fracturing. The war was ending, but in the cells where the humans awaited judgment, victory felt hollow. They had won the war. The question was whether any of them could win the peace. The detention cells were more comfortable than Deho expected. Clean, well-lit, each human had a private room with basic amenities. It was clear the Dominion didn't know whether they were detaining war criminals or war heroes. So they treated them like both. Minji spent her time reviewing intelligence, reports on a datapad they had somehow failed to confiscate. Old habits died hard. On the third day of their detention, she made a discovery that changed everything. Deho, she called through the communication panel. You need to see this. They were allowed to meet in a common area under guard supervision. Minji spread intelligence data across a holodisplay. Maps of void collective territory, movement patterns, communication intercepts, and something else. Something unexpected. I've been analyzing their retreat patterns, Minji explained. They're not just falling back. They're fleeing, and not from us. Look at this. She pulled up deep space sensor readings. Behind void collective territory, something vast was moving. Energy signatures that dwarfed entire fleets. Gravitational distortions that bent space itself. What is that? Taiwan asked. I don't know. But the void collective does. They've been running from it since before they ever encountered the Dominion. Their invasion wasn't expansion. It was evacuation. The implications hit Deho like a physical blow. They're refugees. Yes, desperate refugees fleeing something worse than themselves. They weren't trying to conquer the galaxy. They were trying to survive long enough to escape whatever that thing is. G1 studied the data. The biological data makes sense now. Their rapid adaptation. Their aggressive expansion. Classic refugee survival strategies. Adapt fast or die. Expand fast or be consumed. They're us, Deho said quietly. They're doing exactly what humans would do in their position. Fighting for survival with everything they have. Not because they want to, because they have no choice. The discovery was presented to the Dominion Council within hours. Velthor escorted the humans to the council chamber. This time, they weren't witnesses or defendants. They were advisors facing an impossible choice. Counselor Thress studied the data with growing horror. If this is true, then we've been fighting the wrong enemy. Not the wrong enemy? Deho corrected. Just an enemy who became one out of desperation rather than choice, like humanity often did in our history. Admiral Kroshven stood in the military gallery. What do you propose, Captain? We can't simply allow the Void Collective to continue their invasion, regardless of their motivations. Deho looked at Minji at Taiwan. At Jiwan, his team of monsters who remembered they were human. He thought about the 8 months of warfare. The terrible things they had done. The victories they had won. The prices they had paid. We stop fighting them, he said finally. And we start fighting with them. The council chamber erupted in protest. The idea was insane. The Void Collective had killed millions. They had destroyed worlds. They couldn't be trusted. Deho waited for the noise to subside. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of hard-earned authority. The Dominion brought us here because we understand war. Well, here's what I understand. The Void Collective is a threat because they're desperate. Eliminate the desperation and you eliminate the threat. They need somewhere to go. Territory they can occupy without displacing other civilizations. Help them find that, and this war ends. You want us to help the enemy? Thress asked incredulously. I want you to help refugees, Deho replied. There's a difference. The Dominion controls thousands of worlds. How many of those are uninhabited but habitable? How many could support Void Collective populations without conflict? Velthor consulted his datapad. Approximately 400 worlds meet those criteria. But the political complications are manageable, Minji interrupted. We offer them sanctuary in exchange for full cessation of hostilities. We establish diplomatic relations. We help them evacuate their remaining populations ahead of whatever that thing is in deep space. And in return, they integrate peacefully into the Dominion as autonomous territories. They would never agree, Kroshven said. We've spent months destroying them. Why would they trust us? Deho smiled grimly. Because I'm going to propose something else. Something bigger. We combine forces. Dominion resources. Human tactics. Void Collective coordination. We create a joint military force and face whatever's coming together. The chamber fell silent. The idea was radical, unprecedented, insane. It was also the only path forward that didn't end in mutual destruction. Over the next 6 weeks, negotiations proceeded. The Void Collective leadership was skeptical, but desperate enough to listen. Deho led the human delegation. His reputation as the monster who won battles made him the only voice they would trust. The final agreement was reached in a neutral system. Deho stood aboard a Void Collective command ship, facing their prime collective node. The being was vast, complex, beautiful in an alien way. You destroyed our forces, the node communicated. You killed millions of our people. Why should we trust you? Because I understand you, Deho replied. I know what desperation looks like. What it makes people do. My species has been desperate more times than I can count. We fought wars that nearly destroyed us. We survived because we learned when to stop fighting and start cooperating. And if we refuse, then we all die. That thing in deep space doesn't care about politics or territory. It'll consume the Void Collective, then the Dominion, then Earth, or we stand together and maybe survive. Your choice. The node was silent for a long moment. Then, you are not what we expected. When we heard of human involvement, we thought the Dominion had found new weapons. Instead, they found soldiers who understand suffering. Everyone suffers, Deho said. The question is what we do about it. The alliance was formed. Dominion fleets, human advisors, and Void Collective forces combined into a joint military structure. They evacuated Void territories ahead of the approaching threat. They established new colonies on uninhabited worlds. They prepared for the unknown enemy with combined strength. 6 months later, Deho stood on the bridge of a hybrid warship. Dominion engineering. Human tactics. Void collective coordination systems. Around him, officers from all 3 civilizations worked together. It wasn't perfect. There were tensions, disagreements, cultural misunderstandings, but they were working. Together, Velther joined him at the observation window. The ambassador looked better now. His scales had regained their luster. His eyes held something like hope. I came to Earth looking for generals, he said. Military professionals who would follow doctrine and win battles. You got something else, Deho replied. Yes, I got humans who understood that survival requires madness. But also mercy. Who knew when to be monsters and when to be human again? Velther paused. You could have killed them all. The Void Collective. You had the final lesson protocol. You could have ended the war through genocide. Yes, why didn't you? Deho was quiet for a long moment, watching stars drift past. Because wars don't end by killing everyone. They end when people decide there are better things to do than keep fighting. We gave the Void Collective something better, sanctuary, purpose, hope. That ends wars better than any weapon. Earth taught you to be warriors, but something else taught you to be wise. Earth taught us everything, Deho corrected. How to fight, how to survive, how to kill, but also how to rebuild, how to forgive, how to remember we're more than our worst moments. That's the real lesson of human history. Not that we can be monsters, that we can choose to be something else. Taiwan approached with tactical reports. He looked more like himself now. The mechanical efficiency was fading. He smiled occasionally. He had started talking about things other than optimal killing strategies. Minji was rebuilding her intelligence network with Void Collective help. Her reports were still sharp, but they included recommendations for diplomatic solutions alongside military options. Jiwan had repurposed her biological expertise toward medicine, helping treat diseases in refugee populations. They were healing, slowly, painfully, but healing, Admiral. Kroshvin addressed the combined fleet through ship-wide communications. All vessels were approaching the boundary of known space. Whatever drove the Void Collective from their home territory is ahead. We don't know what we'll find, but we face it together. Dominion, human, and Void as one force. Deho watched the fleet move into formation. Thousands of ships from 3 civilizations. Once enemies, now allies. Not because they loved each other, because they understood that survival required cooperation more than conflict. Captain, a Void officer called from a tactical station. We're detecting massive energy signatures ahead. Confirming multiple hostile contacts. All ships to battle stations, Kroshvin ordered. Prepare for engagement. Deho felt the familiar pre-battle calm settle over him. But this time it was different. He wasn't fighting to destroy an enemy. He was fighting to protect an alliance. To defend refugees. To give desperate beings a chance at survival. It was still war. Still terrible. Still brutal, but it was war with purpose. War with meaning. War that protected rather than simply destroyed. All stations report ready, Minji announced. Deho took a breath. Then let's show this new enemy what happens when you threaten 3 civilizations that learned how to survive together. The fleet moved forward into the unknown.